Good evening, and welcome to our presentation on genes gone bad, cancer prevention, and lifestyle changes to improve outcomes. We're so excited. This is our last seminar of the evening, but we're looking very forward to 2024 and bringing you additional news and information. And please, if you have any comments or suggestions on topics you'd like to see for 2024, please put those in the chat box. And it's my pleasure and to introduce Dr. Jessica Ridgely. Thank you, Dr. Ridgely. We look forward to hearing your wonderful presentation for this evening.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ridgely. I work at Skyridge Primary Care in Lone Tree. I'm attached to Skyridge Primary Care, or I'm attached to Skyridge Medical Center, sorry. And hopefully you guys can see my presentation at the bottom. I do have my email, and anybody who would want to contact me could contact me there. Tonight we're going to talk about genes gone bad, cancer prevention and lifestyle. The idea of this is to think about what we can do to prevent cancer from happening, also to hopefully help an outcome during, and also to consider things that could be helpful naturally in remission and that kind of thing. So hopefully this is helpful. So plan of attack, we're going to talk about how genes go bad. So we're going to talk about a subject called epigenetics, which I hear a lot of people saying, well, it's just in my gene. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And so for this, I wanted to help people understand what epigenetics is and how they work and how we can actually affect our own outcomes. And then how certain things can lead to cancer, what those are, how we can avoid them, and then lifestyles to help prevent cancer as well as help with cancer, and then natural helpers that could be beneficial. So let's talk a little bit about epigenetics. So epigenetics is a study of how behaviors and environment change the way our genes interact, how they express themselves. And when we're looking at this, you have your genetics and you have your environment. And in cancer, about 5 to 10% of cancer is genetically related, but that leaves 90 to 95% on how our bodies utilize the inputs that cause them to express themselves and how they express themselves. And that is where epigenetics comes in. That is the study of how the genes express themselves. And so what we're going to talk about today is how genes can change and what can change them for good and for bad. So when we're talking about environmental aspects that can cause genes to go bad, we're talking a lot about poor diet, sedentary lifestyle, environmental toxins, which I do think I'd like to do something in the future on environmental toxins because that's actually a big study of different things. And then also smoking and radiation are some big ones, but we're going to talk about some other ones as well. And the way to explain epigenetics is that DNA is our hard drive. It is this computer that we work on. It's got all the inputs in there, but we have to put something in to create something that we want out. And that's our software. So when we put things in through our environment, we are actually inputting things to create an output. And that is how epigenetics works. So that's our software that's on the hardware that is our DNA. So when we're talking about cancer, I want to talk about how cancer cannot be passed down from parent to child. So if you have cancer, you cannot pass it down. You cannot pass down the tumor cells that change and have changed to become cancer cells. You cannot pass down those genetics. And that is very important to understand. What you can pass down is the changes in the genetics that lead to cancer. That's called transgenerational inheritance. So when we're looking at this slide, we have one area where we have the phenomena, which are things that are more genetic. Like this is kind of our hardware. These are things that happen, and you don't really need to know the names of these. I'm just kind of put this in here so that you can understand kind of the complexity of it. But then in your development, your epigenetics kind of turn off genes and they turn on genes. And this starts from the time that you're in the womb and kind of you're getting certain inputs. From there, it starts from that perspective. It goes all the way through childhood. It involves like how your childhood was and how things are, um, you know, with the things that you eat and that kind of thing. And a good example of kind of epigenetics that many people are aware of is was a study done that called the ACE study, which is adverse childhood events. And those adverse childhood events showed that if you had more than a certain number, that your likelihood for chronic diseases was much higher. And this includes cancer. And that was because the stress of those adverse childhood events actually changed how your cells and your DNA actually utilize that information, what they actually produced. And it provided more of the stress further on once you actually became an adult. So that is a good way to understand this, that it's stress related, it's diet related, it's lifestyle related. But the good thing to understand is that it's not just what we put in can be negatively affected. There are things that we can do to positively in fact affect it and shift it back the other direction. And so it's very important to understand that just because maybe certain things have shifted it negatively, we can start to make choices that actually help to improve our genetic output. So that DNA is not your destiny, and we have a lot of control over what our genes actually do. When it comes to other chronic diseases, it's about 98% for most chronic diseases is environment, and that 2% is the actual DNA or that hardware. So I cannot answer this question unless it seriously causes you stress. Seasons may cause epigenetic effects, and I'm not going to answer the astrology thing, but I thought this was funny. So moving on to what makes genes go bad. So now we've talked about how we have a lot of control over how our genes express themselves with epigenetics. How do we make them go bad or good? And then we'll talk about the good later. So, talking about this, there are some different things that are probably the more positive things that, not positive is not the correct word, things that have more of a likelihood to affect our cancer development. Bad diet is definitely one of them. And actually, let me go back a little bit. The reason I chose the ones that I chose are because these are probably the most common cancers. Colon cancer is the number one among men and women, and lung cancer is the number two. Breast cancer is the number one among just women because it being the hormonal cancer, and prostate cancer is the number one amongst men for hormonal cancer. So these are some heavy hitters, things that we see a lot, things that we have friends who have them. We have, family members who have them. So these are ones that I really wanted to kind of show how these different things can affect us. So bad diet obviously is one of them, and it affects every single one of the cancers. Being overweight is definitely something that can affect that. And then a sedentary lifestyle affects all of them. Now, when we talk about those, all kind of go together a little bit, and I will be focusing more on those. And then we have toxins in the world. And environmental toxins are extremely interesting, and you can see how they affect all of these major cancers that we have out there. And honestly, they affect a lot more than just these four. So, as with the other ones, but when we're talking about toxins, I like to tell a story about how when I was in residency, I lived in Massachusetts in an area that GE used to have one of their major plants. And before there was a lot of regulation into what could be kind of put out into the air and then into the water supplies, they were pushing out a lot of toxins called PCBs into the water system of this area. I went to I went to a residency in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and they were putting on a lot of PCBs. And this was going on for a good 30 years. And then they started to notice that people in that area were having more and more cancer development. And actually, there was 50% more cancer development in the areas that they were pushing out these PCBs, because despite having a good water supply, supposedly, you can't actually get rid of PCBs without filtering them out specifically. So this was actually causing a lot more cancer in that area. And that's not exactly something that any of the individuals in that area, one, knew about or really had any control about at that time. Another one would be Flint, Michigan, and with the lead and the stress of lead on the body and how it can cause GI cancers. I have a sneaking suspicion that as they follow the individuals that had to go through that, that they're going to find more and more cancers that are going to develop that are associated with that lead. So there's a lot of toxins out there. There's some that we have a lot of control over, and there's some that we don't. And so later on, I do would like to do a talk on the toxins, because I think that's important that people understand what they can and can't control. But it is important to understand that there are some things that we just are not able to control when it comes to our epigenetics, because they're in and around us. We either don't know about them or we just can't control them. But I'm going to mainly focus on things that we can, such as our low vitamin D intake, which is also associated with all four types of major cancers. High sugar intake is actually associated only with the top three, the colon, breast, and prostate. There's never been a link to lung cancer with high sugar intake. But interesting, when it comes to breast cancer, one of the things they found is that a person could decrease, um, they can decrease the breast cancer by, well, actually, I should say they could decrease, they can improve their outcome, and they can decrease the likelihood that they're going to get it again by just decreasing their sugar intake by 30 grams daily. So, and that's all types of sugars. Alcohol is associated with all types of cancer, including many GI cancers. And we'll talk about, and when it comes to alcohol, the levels that are recommended is no more than 7 servings in a week for women and 10 servings in a week for men. Smoking is associated with all of them and many others, including bladder cancer, brain cancer, and many, many others. I don't think there's too many cancers that smoking is not associated with, because of the number of carcinogens that we actually bring into our body just by smoking tobacco. And then we also talk about exposure to radiation. Exposure to radiation, sometimes this could be a job-related issue, but there's also aspects such as getting a lot of mammograms. And there's been discussion about the fact that mammogram is our number one source of breast cancer, but there's a question of how much this is adding to the radiation as a whole to the body. So that's something that hasn't fully been delineated yet, but is something that is actually being assessed at this time. All right. So, what are foods? When we talk about bad diet, we need to talk about, well, what about the things in our diet can actually cause this? And these are the heavy hitters. So, we talked a little bit about them, a few of them, but processed meats is a big one. So, some people know about the China study, and the China study was this very large study done in China about Western types of illnesses, including cancer, and looking at whether, associations between certain types of foods, types of diets, that kind of thing, and developing chronic diseases, including cancer. And they did find that a vegetarian diet is helpful. But one thing that I feel like was somewhat missed in this and many diets or many scientific studies about diet is that not all meats are bad. And we do need a certain amount of protein in our diet. I talk about that in some of my other lectures, but it's very important to make sure you're getting enough protein. So, what exactly is causing cancer when it comes to meat? And those are your processed meats. So, if you're consuming more, uh, if you're consuming it daily, then it increases your risk by 18%. So processed meats would be your sausage, it would be bacon, it would be your cured meats, it would be anything that has nitrates or nitrites in it. it is overcooking that protein and causing charring, which does lead to discussion about barbecue. But your smoked barbecues are actually some of your healthier ways to cook it because you cook it at a lower temperature. So there are different ways that you can cook meat that is healthier versus not healthy. And then when we're talking about starches, if you're cooking starches, you can actually end up causing certain things like ovarian endometrial cancer, which are hormonal cancers as well. And so there is important that you don't overcook your food and you actually allow things to cook at a little bit slower level. So this is also where some processed foods can come into play as well. And then heavy use of alcohol is associated with GI cancers. Obviously, that's liver cancer, pancreatic cancer, or stomach cancer, esophageal cancer as well, are the main ones. But alcohol is also associated, as we saw, with the other types of cancer as well. And there's dairy. So dairy has a lot of hormones in it that by drinking dairy, you can actually increase your risk of hormonal cancers. And that is um, a definitive link. And it also is a definitive link with colon cancer. And then you have your sugar and refined carbs, which we showed pretty much had a link to the major ones, not including lung cancer. And the amount that I recommend on sugar is to not have more than 40 grams of sugar per day. Um, the way I would describe this is sugar is mostly through your added sugar. When it's coming to like your fruits and vegetables, I highly recommend getting a lot of fruits and vegetables. So you need to be moderate on the fruits, no more than about 2 to 3 fruits per day to help with that. And one that really kind of surprised me in this list was the microwave popcorn. And it is the just give me a second, it is the perfluorinated compound. So this is the environmental toxins that we're talking about that is used in the processing of the popcorn. So if you were to do regular popcorn, it is not actually toxic, but the microwave popcorn is. So that's something to note. And then your food dyes, specifically red number 3 and red number 40, as well as yellow number 5 and yellow number 6, are associated with cancers. So these are some of the heaviest hitters when it comes to things that can cause cancer from a food perspective. All right, so what are the heavy hitters for that can help not cause cancer and actually can help? One of the big ones is your cruciferous vegetables. So that is your broccoli, your cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, bok choy. These have a couple different compounds that are really interesting. One is called sulforaphanes, which have been found to decrease the incidence of hormonal and colon cancer. There is also the DIM, which is diindolylmethane. A lot of people do know about DIM. It's actually a supplement that's been kind of prepared, but those can actually help with hormonal cancers as well. Then we have berries. Why are berries so helpful? These have tons of antioxidants that help the immune system and to decrease inflammation. And those are two big things when it comes to cancer is your immune system, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, and the inflammation that's developed. So anytime the body is under a significant more inflammation, there is going to be bigger cell turnover. And anytime there's more cell turnover, you can actually start to have changes in the genetics that can lead to cancer. So inflammation is definitely something that is a problem across the board for almost all chronic diseases, including cancer. And so anything that you can do that is anti-inflammatory is helpful. Berries happen to be a big one for that one. And so do nuts. Nuts have a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids that are very anti-inflammatory. Brazil nuts has been found to help with lung cancer. I'm not sure if it's because it's high in selenium, but that's an interesting one. Walnuts have been found to be helpful in breast cancer and is also associated with colorectal, pancreas, and endometrial cancer. And then olive oil is just very anti-inflammatory. It's part of the Mediterranean diet, has been found to be very helpful in different types of cancers. And actually, preventing cancer, I should say, more so. Tomatoes are very interesting. They are anti-inflammatory, and obviously, you can do a lot with tomatoes. The tomatoes have actually been found, eating more tomatoes have been found to one, prevent prostate cancer, and also help to improve the prostate cancer outcomes. It has not been tested anything else that I know of, but that is a big one. Garlic, and this also includes onions, has a lot of antioxidant capacity. It also has this something called allicin, which is very anti-inflammatory and also is very helpful from the immune system. As I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Omega-3 fatty acids are also one of those that helps with the immune system, is very important in brain health and heart health. Um, so turmeric as a spice can be really helpful. It's Turmeric has to be prepared certain ways. So actually, when it's prepared in dishes where it has some fat and some pepper, is actually the most absorbable. But it has actually been found to be one of the most anti-inflammatory botanicals that we have, like overall. And then mushrooms, and we're going to talk more about the mushroom family when we talk about some natural helpers with prevention of cancer and then improving rates of remission. All right, so the to-do list is nothing. It is time for me to stop my sedentary lifestyle. I think we all say this to ourselves from one time or another. So let's talk about physical activity for cancer. It's actually this is just as big as diet. And when we're talking about physical activity, we're not talking about the weight of an individual or how much obesity is playing into it. Like, this is how much activity you have versus not having the activity and how it plays into cancer. So when they're doing these studies, they're not looking at, is this a normal weight individual? They're looking at how much people are actually doing this physical activity. And we will talk about the amount, but when it comes to risk reduction for cancers, it decreases colon cancer risk by 19%. If breast cancer is 12 to 21%, prostate cancer is 20%, bladder cancer is 15%, endometrial cancer is 20%, kidney cancer is 12%, and stomach cancer was 19%. The survivor benefit is also very interesting. It has not been done in as many types of cancer, but the ones that I could find, survivor benefit for people who met certain physical activity goals. For survivors, it would be a 30% benefit. For breast cancer, is 42% benefit, and prostate cancer is 33% benefit. So one of the things I really tell all of my cancer patients is that you have to get out and walk. And sometimes there's going to be days that you just can't, but on the days that you can, even when you don't really feel like it, you still should get out there and do some walking. If you can't walk, find someplace else you can go and just get a little bit of activity. And then, so how much activity do we need? So I got some definitive guidelines here. So if we're talking moderate activity, and that's a heart rate of 100 to 120 beats per minute, then that is when you need about 150 to 300 minutes per week. 150 being the minimum. If you're doing more vigorous activity, that's about 120 to 150 beats per minute of the heart rate in a minute time frame while you're working out, then the requirements drop pretty dramatically to 75 to 100 minutes per week. So if you are okay with just kind of the slow burn and doing it a longer amount of time, you can definitely get that moderate activity. But otherwise, you need to get a little bit more vigorous with your heart rate around 120 to 140. It depends on age. I would recommend 120 to 140 is always safe. So strength training is highly recommended, and that's about 2 times per week for about 30 to 45 minutes. And that would be considered part of your vigorous activity if you're doing a consistent strength training. And then balance and flexibility is very important just from an overall health and wellness perspective. All right, so why do we want to do this exercise? Well, from a cancer perspective, anything that causes more inflammation is going to create a situation that is going to make our genes more likely to kind of go off the rails. So it decreases sex hormone and growth factors that are associated with cancer. So that's really important. It decreases insulin levels. And so insulin works with insulin growth factor 1 that can actually increase um, a lot of inflammation in certain situations, especially if we're overfeeding ourselves, and it actually can cause that quite a bit. So that's really important. Overall, it decreases inflammation. It improves immune function, which we're going to talk about, like I said, and that's really important when it comes to cancer, how the immune system functions and works with cancer once we start to have those problems. It reduces food travel time. So it actually improves how fast you digest and move your food through. By doing that, it actually reduces the amount of time that certain carcinogens can be absorbed. And so, therefore, that's where it can actually really help decrease the likelihood of cancer from that. And also to help with, and then, of course, it prevents obesity, which is something that is related to cancer. All right. I named my dog 5 Miles so I can tell people I walk 5 miles every day. Whoever thought of this was genius. However, sadly, it doesn't work that way. We really have to get out there and walk those miles. All right, the immune system. So I really wanted to talk about how the immune system affects cancer. So all type of immunodeficiencies are associated with higher risk of cancer. That is whether you're born with an immunodeficiency, if you have HIV, if you're taking medications that cause immunodeficiencies, anything that causes immunodeficiency has been linked to a higher risk of cancer. And the reason is because your immune cells are your primary cells in your body that find these cancer cells and actually get rid of them before they become an issue. So there's always the possibility, and every day, all the time, our bodies are creating new cells, and there are going to be cells that don't quite make the cut, and our immune system makes that decision. So when we're talking about being able to kind of control, help, and improve cancer outcomes, the immune system is probably one of the most important systems that we need to support. And one of the things that they found is that if a tumor, when they biopsy it, has more immune cell infiltrate, you have a better likelihood of going to remission and having a survival rate afterwards. Cancer cells, they have mutations that are recognized by certain cells, and that's how they decide whether to kind of take out those cells is by these little mutations. And because they have these mutations, cancer cells are consistently having to evade immune destruction by doing something called immunoediting. So there is definitely this battle between the immune cells and the cancer cells, and we want the immune cells to win. Um, Ones that are definitely involved is your dendritic cells, your T cells, your natural killer cells are actually one of the main ones that identify and send out signals to the other immune cells that something needs to be basically killed. So those are really important. And then there are certain lymphocytes that actually recognize and eliminate cells that are stressed and potentially pre-malignant. All right, so let's talk about some natural helpers that outside of diet and lifestyle, which are probably the most important natural helpers we can do with that anti-inflammatory diet and the different things that we were talking about. Outside of those, there's a few things that can be really helpful, but I do want to put a disclaimer in here. If you are trying to prevent cancer or you are in remission, these are all things that could be very helpful for you. If you are undergoing cancer treatment, you should not start anything different, change anything, or try anything without your oncologist support and with them knowing that you're doing it. A lot of medications are used in cancer that are very strong and need to be um, and you can have interactions with certain types of things. So just be very careful with that and do not change anything that you're doing at this point in time if you are on ongoing cancer treatment. All right. So some of the things that can be super helpful. Vitamin D. Vitamin D is huge. Um, Vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin that we should be able to get through the sun. There are certain aspects of vitamin D that we can't get because we may have other nutrition that isn't exactly where it needs to be in our body. So sometimes we aren't able to convert the vitamin D to the vitamin D3 that we need. So I check vitamin D pretty regularly in my patients. I prefer it to be above 40, and optimal dosing for vitamin D is 50 to 80. Going above 80 is not so much of a problem, but you can, the higher you get, because it is fat soluble, it can become toxic. So you do have to be careful about that. So it's not like you can just take tons of vitamin D, but a good dose of vitamin D is at least 2,000 to 5,000 units per day. I rarely ever see somebody go over with 5,000 units. And you can do something where you take it during the wintertime. And then if you know that you get out a lot of times in the sun on the summertime, you can just kind of stop it and just kind of vary how you take it. But it is really important to have it. And what vitamin D does is it impairs the progression of breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer. And that has actually been found that it actually slows the progression of those cancers. And I'm sure that if we looked at a lot of the other cancers, we'd find that there's probably been some studies that have been for that as well. It also prevents malignant transformation, meaning that you have a cancer and it's in one area. Because it helps to impair the progression, it actually helps to impair it spreading to other areas of the body. So that's kind of huge when it comes to vitamin D. Vitamin D is also incredibly important with the immune system and supporting the immune system and making sure that that's functioning well and making sure that you have an adaptive immune system. So vitamin D is important from multiple perspectives. Garlic. Garlic is one that we talked about earlier. It has been found to inhibit the growth of different cancer cells, including multiple myeloma. And that is, a big one. So I highly recommend looking into some garlic, adding garlic to, and this is the thing about certain things. Garlic can be added to foods. So these are some of the things that we can just add to foods. You can do that. You can add those to foods. It will make an overall healthier diet, make it more anti-inflammatory. So that's, so garlic is a big heavy hitter. Green tea is really interesting. Green tea has found to have an inverse relationship with the growth of non-Hodgkin's, endometrial, lung, oral, and ovarian cancer. What does that mean? It means that the more green tea you have, the less likely there is a growth of these different types of cancers. Green tea is also really helpful from a lot of different other aspects and is found to be extremely anti-inflammatory. You can take this in a supplement or you can just drink it. Omega-3s. Omega-3s are, I've talked about this quite a bit in my nutrition basics webinar, and I will give a link to some of my other webinars. But I talk a lot about that. But the omega-3s are found to improve the quality of life during cancer, which is a big one. I mean, when you're actually being treated for it and going through it, it's pretty rough. So anything that you can do to improve your quality of life is important. And by the way, I also want to state that they've found people who do try to exercise pretty consistently during treatment of cancer, that improves quality of life as well. It decreases the likelihood of developing neuropathy. Neuropathy is when you develop kind of the pinprickling feelings in your feet and your hands, and they can even go further up. It is relatively common with chemotherapies, and so omega-3s can be super helpful with that. It also decreases post-op complications. Now, omega-3s are not recommended to be taken during the operation, right before or during the operation, because they do have a blood thinning effect, but they can help to decrease the post-op complications and healing aspect. Turmeric. So turmeric is one that I'm going to add a disclaimer to. Not all no supplements are all made equal. Turmeric is probably the biggest when it comes to this. You have to be very careful that you're not just getting any old turmeric. If you are under treatment, you absolutely cannot be on turmeric. And I honestly would not, unless you're already eating like Indian food or other types of food that have turmeric, I would not add or change anything because turmeric can have interactions with medication. If you're already eating it, I would continue to eat it in the amounts that you have been, but I do not recommend changing that during treatment. But beforehand, and in remission, turmeric is huge. There has been significant amounts of data in how it inhibits the growth of cancer, that it inhibits the blood supply to the cancer cells, and it also inhibits overall tumor growth. So it will also, in the same sense, it also does prevent malignant transformation as well. So turmeric is a great botanical. You have to make sure that you're getting a very good source of turmeric. There was a period of time where the FDA had to pull turmeric because it had heavy metals in it. It is a root, and therefore it will pull whatever into it that is coming from the soil that is grown. And if it is not prepared properly for supplements, then it can have higher levels of heavy metals. So you do have to be careful with turmeric, but there are some really good turmeric supplements out there as well. So, and you can also add, if you're not needing, if you're not in the middle of treatment right now, you can add more turmeric to your diet in a lot of different ways, including Indian food, which I think is amazing. So if you haven't tried Indian food, you should. All right. So those are some of your more natural things that you can just add from a dietary perspective. And I wanted to talk about mycomedicinals, which are your fungus, your mushrooms. There is a lot of information, and the information that I got from this is actually a well-researched article that was done by the VA about mycomedicinals in cancer treatment. So this is actually a very good source of information for what mushrooms can do. They are very helpful in prevention and in remission. And like I said, there's more and more data about it being used even in treatment, but because we don't have a lot of that data completely kind of fleshed out, that needs to be something that your oncologist feels good about if you're undergoing treatment. All right, so reishi mushroom, also called the Garoderma lucidum. This is called the mushroom of immortality. It inhibits the cell cycle of cancer cells. It is toxic to cancer cells. It is anti-metastatic. It is very antioxidant, and it is also antimicrobial, so it has some benefit from developing infections as well. Reishi has something called there are polysaccharides GLPS and GLT, which have an anti-cancer effect. The PS has been found to decrease fibrosis of lungs in lung cancer, and the T has actually been found to be synergistic with some chemos. I'm not very specific. I do not know specifics on that one. But together they actually decrease nausea, vomiting, and kidney toxicity. So reishi is actually a really interesting mushroom that can be very helpful. I know that it is helpful in many different types of cancer. Liver cancer is one of them specifically that I remember reading about. Shiitake mushrooms is another really interesting mushroom. It has an active constituent called active hexose correcting compound. And when we're talking about immune cells, this increases natural killer cell activity. So it actually can be helpful in identifying cells that have turned bad earlier on, so that you can kind of get rid of those ahead of time. It also helps to identify the cancer cells that are there for the rest of the immune system. It has been found to increase remission rate in post-cancer treatment. So this is actually a really big one, that, if you have gone through treatment and you're looking at what can I do to make sure that this does not come back, then this is a really good option. And it's easily accessible. So it's not something that you have to get in a supplement. These are things that you can get through your regular diet. You can choose to eat more shiitake mushrooms and put them in different things. All right. So this is a really interesting one. I think this is a really pretty one too, but the turkey-tailed Coriolis versicolor, very appropriate for right before Thanksgiving. This is used in Japan for some GI cancers. It inhibits the growth of cancer cells. It activates immune cytokines, and it stimulates the dendritic cell and the T cells that can infiltrate the tumors after they've been identified by the natural killer cells and start to get rid of them. It is a very strong antioxidant. It has something called the polysaccharide crestin in it, and it has been found to improve 5-year remission rate or decrease 5-year mortality. So it's really that's another really interesting one. I think of all of the ones, but reishi and turkey tail are probably the most well studied when it comes to cancer. A couple others that I thought were interesting was the maitake mushroom. That actually can decrease side effects of chemo, and it does have an anti-tumor effect. Um, and in certain breast cancer in a breast cancer study, it did show that it increased apoptosis, or what apoptosis is breakdown of the breast cancer cells. Lion's mane is another interesting one. This one is neuroprotective. I do not think it's been studied in brain cancer, but it has been found to help protect the brain. It also has been found to reduce lung metastasis. Um, and it has by colon cancer. So it actually has more action in colon cancer, um, because it actually has a similar effect to a certain type of chemo called 5-FU used in cancer. So that's a really interesting one as well. All these are super interesting. I can tell you that there is a good source for that. There's a couple different mushroom supplement companies that are really good. You have to make sure that any kind of supplement that you use has been vetted through either the USP, NSF, FDA, or the GMP. We do not have as good of processes here in the United States as they do in Europe and in some other countries when it comes to supplements. So you do have to be more careful and do your research. Consumerlabs.com does a lot of that research for people. So if you are interested, it is a good idea to, buy a subscription for a period of time and look into supplements that you're interested in. They give a lot of good information when it comes to supplements. So these are some things that can help to prevent cancer from developing. Some of these things can really help with especially the exercise and the diet when we're talking about improving mortality in cancer. Those are the heaviest hitters, is improving that diet and lifestyle and the exercise. And then the natural things that we talked about, including the fungus, is really good for helping in the pre and post treatment, and making sure that you can kind of get past it and actually start to feel healthier overall. All right, so why does the mushroom always get invited to parties? Because he's a fun guy. Thank you very much for listening today. And I do have other videos. This is my YouTube list through Sky Ridge Medical Center. I have a nutrition basics, which talks a lot about just doesn't matter what diet you're on, or if you're on a diet, these are the basics that you absolutely have to have. I talk about gut health and inflammation and why the gut microbiome is so important. I also have one on sleep medicine and different things that can be really helpful in sleep and understanding how sleep works. And then my last one before this one was diabetes and lifestyle, which was a really fun one that I enjoyed doing. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I look forward to any questions. And before we go into questions, I am going to put um, all of my research in here so that you can actually see the different places. And if you're interested in looking at something, you can definitely write it down so that you can take a look at that study. So here they are. Any questions? I'm open to them at this point.
Yes, Dr. Ridgely, we had a question from our audience about brain cancer. You mentioned a number of the cancers, but what is your perspective on that?
So a lot of things, I mean, I did focus on the number one cancers that we struggle with in our society. So there was a lot of them that did mention brain cancer. I didn't put brain cancer on there, but anything from the diet and lifestyle perspective has been found to be helpful in brain cancer as well. Um, Especially, and the glioblastoma is a very difficult one when you're thinking about that. But a lot of the other types of brain cancer, it can be helpful with, and it can help in preventing it for sure. So the diet and lifestyle is probably the most important part. Also, any of the like the green tea, the vitamin D, and all of those would be really, really important. As far as the mushrooms, I did not find anything about the mushrooms in regards to brain cancer.
Thank you. We did have another question about because you mentioned dairy, and is soy milk or nut milk better, or obviously a better choice than dairy?
Yes. So let me see something about soy. Soy milk has not been found to increase hormonal cancers. However, soy in the United States it is produced at such a high rate that they actually cook the soy over 400 degrees, and which causes denaturing of the proteins of the soy in most of the products in the United States. So I don't really recommend soy milk. And I have had a lot of people develop issues with soy because they drink it a lot. I think the nut milks are a much better options. They're a lot less processed. Like for example, almond milk is basically just kind of chopped up almonds to the point of almost, being liquid with a little bit of water, and then they can sometimes they put some things in for solution, which you have to be careful about, such as carrageenan. If they put that in there, those can actually cause more incidence of gastric cancer. But as long as there is not anything in there that is concerning, then, and if they're mostly naturally made, then the nut milks are probably the best ones.
Okay, thank you. And you talked a lot about some different kinds of supplements. Is there any benefit to taking a multivitamin every day?
I am a huge fan of taking a multivitamin every day. Um, our genetics go back and have not significantly changed in over 20,000 years. And obviously, in 20,000 years ago, they had a lot higher caloric output and also ate more food than we do now, or should be eating now. I mean, I think that most of us would like to eat more foods, but our caloric output doesn't really allow us to do that. Um, so when it comes to multivitamin, there are subacute deficiencies that they find significantly. It does affect how our genetics, um, how our genetics express themselves, that epigenetics. So if there is nutritional deficiencies, that is going to create problems from any factor. And from that perspective, I would say I think a multivitamin is good. I recommend doing a whole food based multivitamin, which means that all of the nutrients are bound like they would be found in food. And usually that's what I recommend. I don't really recommend the compounded vitamins. I think they're a little bit harder on the stomach, and the body cannot always process the nutrients as well.
Okay, I think we have one last question. Is we've heard about fiber being important in the colon cancer world. How can you efficiently get more fiber in your diet without eating tree bark?
Um, so fiber is very important in the diet, and if you're eating enough fruits and vegetables, you're getting enough fiber. Those fruits and vegetables also have a lot of antioxidants, and as we talked about, the berries and the cruciferous vegetables and nuts, we're talking about things that have a significant effect on cancer as well. So the best way to get fiber is to eat your fruits and your vegetables. Most people need between 8 to 9 servings. Servings run between a half of a cup to a full cup. You can get fiber through psyllium husk, um, And you can use fiber supplements, but psyllium husk is probably one of the best. It's a soluble fiber that you can use as a powder, and you just kind of put it in some water and drink it. That's an option, but it's when it comes to cancer benefit, you're taking out the benefit of all of the different nutrients, those little micronutrients that you get from the fruits and vegetables. So my number one recommendation would be just to eat the fruits and vegetables and get your diet to a place where you're eating the amount of fiber that you need, which is around 25 grams for a female and 30 grams for a male or more. That is actually minimum amount that has been found to be healthy in a diet. Um, so that would be my number one recommendation. You can do fiber supplements, and if you are going to choose to do fiber supplements, I would choose psyllium.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to our audience for watching this evening. And again, if you have some topics you'd like to see Dr. Ridgely present in 2024, please feel free to put those in the comment section on our Facebook page. And we appreciate you, Dr. Ridgely, for bringing us all this great content over the past year. And we wish everybody in our audience a very, very happy and healthy Thanksgiving.
Healthy Thanksgiving, absolutely.
Thank you all so much.